I was going to share this story with y'all about when I had my first round of chemo and I had a reaction. And I didn't know I was having a reaction to the chemo, but there was one Black woman nurse who was in the room, and it was kind of like this, different chairs around an open room. And I started chemo on Halloween. So everyone's dressed up and the theme, I don't know, was like good guys, bad guys. So she came and she stood right in front of my chair and just looked at me while the other people stopped my chemo. They picked up more steroids to help because my lungs were closing up. And she stood right in front of me and just looked at me. For me, it felt like she was saying, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Mm-hmm. And I went to her afterwards and I told her, I was like, thank you so much. You have no idea how much that meant to me. It might have looked weird to everybody else, but to me, she did not, just like how I'm looking at you, she would not take her eyes off of me. And that was the one time that I felt probably the safest throughout the whole process.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. I would say, as far as I'll say a Black experience, it didn't come strange to me. And being in Oklahoma, things are a little bit different. And so going into the meetings and appointments that I had, I felt that they were listening to me. And I think they recognized that they were saying a lot of things at once that I probably wasn't going to remember because you just overwhelmed and trying to figure out, well, what did they say was going to do? How long I'm going to be out? And you're still trying to work too. And so I would say my experience was on a positive note. It was uplifting. They did tell me from the jump, they said, you're going to survive this. You have to change your mindset of not feeling defeated. Because when you hear cancer, you think of death, and so we want to instill hope in you. Let's try to work on what's the issue? What kind of cancer is it? I mean, as far as the stage and how long you'll need chemo and all this other stuff. And from that part, I just felt like I was being heard. Because anytime that I was feeling weird or I was concerned about something, they had a number, like an emergency number or something for me to call. And people would answer the phone, they would call back. And there wasn't an issue. So I would say for that, I felt like it was on a good note. Now, I know that everyone doesn't have the same experience like I do because you go to different places. And so that's why I always, whatever that I experience, I try to remember that someone else's experience is quite different. But I really feel that a cancer care pack is really important to have because you have so many questions that you're not going to ask on that first appointment. And so just to be able to have a folder or something, that's where I think of it as far as a cancer care pack. So that way you can get your questions answered. So if my sister or your brother has a question or if something happens, they can go and refer back to get some help.
I had to smirk a little bit because when you said the cancer care pack, my care pack was literally a red folder that I avoided like the plague after adding information to. I mean, it was busting at the seams, but I did not. It took months for me to actually go and look at what I had put in there, especially the information that was specifically from my appointments and about my diagnosis and all my treatments. It took months for me to literally sit down and go through them. So that's why I just wanted to add that. But as far as my experience as a Black woman, I just always question if my conversation with my oncologist would have looked differently as it pertains to preserving my fertility in terms of eggs, egg preservation. It seems like it was just to talk about, oh, we're going to try to salvage one ovary. And then there was no conversation about preserving my fertility after that. That was it. And so I remember having to actually initiate the conversation about egg preservation. And it was less than a minute. My oncologist looked at me and said, oh, it's too risky, and went on to the next thing. And I just questioned, if I was a Caucasian woman, would that conversation have looked differently? And if so, like, in what ways? But that is the only thing that comes to mind that's glaring in terms of my experience as a Black woman.
I do think another thing I want to say just is, I know I've said a couple of things about like family and friends. I think there were some people who really did show up in ways that I didn't expect. I had to learn to understand that everybody can't handle this, and they don't handle it well. And it took me a while because I had this expectation for certain people to like be there for me that just weren't in ways that I needed them. And I think that part was a little bit difficult. I think that's also why like I'm sitting here and I'm just kind of in awe. You know what I mean? Just, it helps because I don't have this. I don't have that type of support. I mean, people who understand, who speak the language, who don't think, you know, that when we talk about the symptoms and how it's impacting us right now, how I can come up here pouring sweat and y'all aren't like cringe. It's like, we get it. Here's a fan. So that part.
So I'm part of 2 ovarian cancer support groups. One, shout out to Teal Diva, and she's out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Teal Diva literally saved my life. I was 20, maybe 4 at the time. I'm like randomly working out at the gym, and I have on like a old Survivor shirt, and somebody was like, have you heard of Teal Diva? And I was like, don't know what that is. At this point, I was very much like, I'm not talking about cancer. Like, I'm over, you know what I mean? Like, I just, and she was like, you need to like look them up or whatever. And it was just, I think, a miracle because I found this group that talked about the thing. I ended up being invited to go on a survivors retreat. And that retreat completely opened me up. Like, it broke me. What I now know is like it's not just for survivors. So it's people in all kinds of, stages within their journeys. In my retreat in particular, after my retreat, we lost 2 people. And that really was like, I need to get some help. Like this, now I'm like, I need to figure this out. There's something so beautiful about being in community. And so shout out to Teal Diva. And then for the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance, I'm a part of their Survivors Teaching Students group, where we will talk to medical students about our stories, about our journeys. And I think this group is so important and is so necessary because first off, for us to be able to talk to doctors like before they pick their specialties, but really from our experience of like, you study this, in books and like you study this on paper, but like, let's actually put like a face to it. It's just so impactful. It's so cool. Like you said, just to be able to talk to people and then actually get it. Again, I think that a big barrier for me feeling support within the ovarian cancer community, not only is my age, my current age, but for sure my age at diagnosis, my race, because again, this is like the face of ovarian cancer is just old white women, but also my sexuality. So like talking from this lesbian perspective too, of like, because then there's this expectation of like, oh, like your wife can just have kids. Like there's a lot of, because I think people are trying to like make me feel better or something. And I don't know, like, I don't know where or why that would ever be like comforting to say to somebody, but I think that there's just this like, well, let me just say the thing to like, and it's like, no, like, let's just actually sit in it. Like, even within this survivor space, like, let's actually sit in what this is like. I actually don't need to be comforted. Like, I have a therapist, I have a spouse, I have a whoever for that. Like, but let's just sit in it and let's just talk about it in this very real way. So yeah, I think survivor groups, they're just so necessary. But I know for me, like, there's always this feeling like I don't really fit in here. Like if it's and within Black spaces in general because of my sexuality. Obviously, we know like homophobia is a thing within our community. So I always feel like there's like no place for me. So that's kind of hard. But I think in general, like the two groups that I just named, I mean, they've impacted my life greatly.
You know how you start putting things in the computer system, things pop up and then it pops up on your cell phone. And so that's how I made the connection with the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance that popped up on Facebook. And I said, oh, what is this? Okay, well, thank you for listening to my conversations. And so they had a call out for advocate leaders. And that's where I signed up and they accepted me. And I was able to come to DC March of 2020, a week before the world shut down from COVID. And so just being able to go and share my story with other politicians about what's going on and how important it is for cancer research, it just opened my eyes up to another realm. Like I said, I'm always in behavioral health, but then we look into research and cancer funding and how all of that plays a part. And you can go and speak with senators and you know, about what's going on, and they in return sign off on the bill. That is just really overwhelming. So I love Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance. I faithfully do whatever they ask me to do. Yes, I will be there.
I was supposed to be there, but I couldn't get out of Hawaii. So mine, well, for the advocacy one, so mine was all like online. I'm not gonna listen to me. Like, kind of just on Zoom. Didn't even know what Zoom was. It was like right before COVID.
Right.
So we could have met. Like,
yes, a long time ago. Right. But it is a wonderful experience, and they have so many different resources within the organization itself, and they don't just serve the city or the state that they're in. They serve a lot of people. So, but we wouldn't know that if, you know, the resources are not easily accessible to everybody, and some people don't have internet to get on Google to look up those things. So I'm happy to kind of share as much as I can with what I learned. Yeah.
On that note of sharing, I would say, because as I mentioned earlier, the formalized support groups were not for me at all. I think I can count how many groups I've actually attended, which is probably 3. I realized that my support came in a different way, and Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance helped me to support other women through Women to Women initiative. And that's where you're paired with another cancer survivor or newly diagnosed woman who is sharing a similar type of diagnosis that you have, or a similar staging that you can support and just help along the way. I think that is what was my means, that served as my main means of support. It just felt amazing to be able to be authentic in sharing my story. And I always preface it like during my initial conversations with the women that they call them matches. So when I initially get a match, I'm like, okay, so I just want to, put out a disclaimer. I can be ridiculously raw and, transparent. Yeah. Or, I can I don't like to sugarcoat my journey, but I do understand that given, based upon where you are in your process, in your journey with cancer, you have to be mindful. But I would say that has been an amazing experience to share in that way. And so that for me was a support group. Well, it was my support group, was my means of support. So I do thoroughly enjoy that. And I'm so appreciative that this organization allowed me to be a part of that. And I will say also the Clarity Foundation opened up my eyes to a plethora of resources that are out there for women. I was able to get free therapy for, I think it was 2 to 3 months. And as you mentioned earlier, the bills pile up with your treatments. And so to have that taken off of my load, it was truly a blessing. Yeah. So
Good. I appreciate that perspective too, because I don't think a lot of people think about how it doesn't necessarily have to be in that group setting. So I appreciate you sharing that part too. And I didn't know y'all two were advocate leaders. That's how I am.
Oh.
So just in the fall, January actually, I applied in the fall and then I was accepted into the program in January. So it's still filling out because I wanted to find, I think being able to talk to other people, and like we said, it's that sense of community that I think everybody needs to have, and whatever that looks like for you, and being able to like share my story online, that helped. But then being able to get with other people who were, I don't know, who have been in this much longer than me because I didn't even know, like we were talking about earlier, the terminology. There's so much. I'm like, I don't understand this. What does this mean? And people are so accustomed to using these terms and they're so familiar with it that there was never anything that broke it down. Like you mentioned earlier, what's debulking? What are these things? So you start to learn from the folks that have been doing this much longer. And that's what helped me. My hospital also has a support group. And I think I'm the youngest one in there. And it's a little different, but I learned from them. And it's not specific to ovarian cancer. It's a gynecological cancer group. But it helps. I pay attention to what they say they're going through so that I can pay attention to seeing it in myself.
I will say too, because I don't know, I think one of the things that I would love to see within the ovarian cancer space that the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance does do a very good job of is making sure that we also understand that trans men can also not only get ovarian cancer, but also be survivors of it. I recently was, to your point, in community with somebody 16 years old, a trans boy who was diagnosed. And as you can imagine, like the gender dysphoria, just all the things, right? Because again, like we're talking about like gynecological like issues. And I just am really, really thankful that the Research Alliance really understands like no matter what you say or think or whatever, we just need to talk about things that are, no matter how somebody identifies. If you're born with ovaries, you are at risk of getting ovarian cancer, period, point blank. And we all need to find that community, like you were saying. And so I would also just be remiss if I didn't mention and shout out the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance for that as well.
So I just want to say, I wear teal all the time. I always have a teal bracelet on, whether it's jewelry or a plastic band. And I've even had people say, well, why do you keep wearing the bracelet? You do with cancer now, just take it off. But I wear it for hope, to be able to instill a conversation with someone. And so every once in a while, especially if I'm doing like vendor shows, I run into someone that had ovarian cancer, or they had a friend that had ovarian cancer. And so it starts that conversation, because then they're like, oh, you know what? I need to probably go and get checked out. I was in one of those shoe stores, one of the main tennis shoe stores. And she said, I see you always picking up teal. Is that your color? And I was like, yeah, I really like this color. And she was like, my friend is going through ovarian cancer treatment right now, and she's a teenager. She's maybe like 17, 18 years old. And so that started a conversation, and then we're having that talk. So I know that we don't want to talk about it a lot because nobody wants to have that conversation. But once you start that conversation and just share your story with people, you'll be surprised how you would be able to help someone else, either through empowerment, connecting them with resources, just listening, that really does make a difference.
Yeah.
So
I feel like support groups are so needed because it's like we're all a part of this club that like no one wants to be a part of it.
Right.
And like, we could just bond over that, you know what I mean? And,
right.
And talk about it and share our experiences. You just mentioned resources. The amount of resources that are so available to all of us. I mean, from our caregivers, our families, us as the actual, patients or survivors. It's just so much. Like, I can't think of a reason not to be a part of a support group. I definitely spent years avoiding them because of all the barriers that we talked about, especially my Blackness. Like, that's a huge barrier, I think, for me in the ovarian cancer space, connecting. But within these white-centered groups, there's always some of us, and we always somehow find each other. And I think for me, like, that's what's so defined. You know what I mean? Where, like, I could start out feeling so uncomfortable and just completely uninterested. But, like, we always find each other. And I think for me, like, absent of just the diagnosis, I think my mental health, because of this diagnosis, could not have survived. Like, I would not have survived, like, the mental health struggles had I not been connected to a support group.
Mm-hmm. I thank you for sharing that, Camille, because it does take a certain level of bravado to put yourself out there. And I do recall, like, even though I mentioned there was a few support group sessions that I did attend, I had to remind myself, like, immediately I had to reframe my thinking, reshape my thinking. When I'm joining these Zoom meetings and I'm the only Black woman in these little squares, the Zoom squares, I'm like, okay, this is your moment. This is your time to, be that representation for Black and brown women, because we have so little. And so that is what helped me to get through it, just knowing that it won't always be this way. And I can be the voice to, maybe ignite a different trajectory for different organizations and different spaces for Black women, specifically Black and brown women going through this journey, to be able to say, hey, I'm here to support you, or you're not alone in your plight. So I think that's what empowered me to know that it won't always look this way. And if I have to be the voice for now, I definitely want to share and to continue my efforts in that way. So I think that's what definitely encouraged me to reshape again my thinking when it comes to support groups, and to be more open in that way.
I think support groups have been beneficial for me, largely because, like, I don't have my mom anymore. My mom isn't alive, so being able to come to groups of other women, and I love having people that feel like sisters. I'm my only child too, so it feels kind of like a new kind of family. I didn't choose it, but it chose me, I guess, right? And that helps me to just feel like, because it is like a sisterhood that we come together in this way that I just never imagined. I didn't think, I'm much younger than most of the people that are in my group. They're younger by like decades. They're like much like maybe my grandma, my great grandma, maybe some of them. But they're still all love. You know what I mean? And I appreciate that. And not just I appreciate it, but I needed that.
Well, and that's why we call each other Teal sisters. I use that language. Anyone that I meet that has a connection, whether it's a caretaker or an actual Teal survivor, I say we're kind of married now. You can't divorce me. And we make that connection. And just meeting women across the globe, to me, is just overwhelming. And it's really unique, because you never know what, how you can help me or how I can help you. So it is a true sisterhood. Yeah.